Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are Fiscal Note, which compromises now CQ, roll call, voter voice, and all of the CQ advocacy products, of course. So delighted everyone could join us today. We've got a great panel, and I mean that. I know I say that all the time, and I always mean it, but I particularly mean it today for Strength in Numbers coalition building. And we know there's been a big interest in this because of the number of you who have signed up. So let's get going here. Joshua Habersky, you'll be familiar with. Josh is the Assistant Vice President of Advocacy at the Independent Community Bankers of America. He's also the Chairman of the Grassroots Professional Network, Contributing Editor at Campaigns and Elections, and recently Adjunct Professor at George Washington Graduate School of Political Management. So he's not busy at all, as you can tell from that bio. And I'm thrilled to have Karen B. Moore here today. It's Karen's first webinar with us. Karen is the founder and CEO of Moore Incorporated, which is Florida's largest independently owned communications and public affairs firm, and it's also in the top 7 largest in the nation. And as well as offices in Tallahassee, Moore Communications Group has offices in West Palm Beach, New Orleans, and Denver. So thrilled to have Karen there. And just a little bit more about Karen. She's really been in this business for a long time, and she's kind of a national thought leader in the advocacy arena. She's helped hundreds of organizations utilize advocacy to develop a powerful voice that breaks through a crowded message landscape, and we know that a lot of those landscapes are particularly noisy. So looking forward to hearing from Karen on how she's had some successes in the coalition business. So I'm thinking we'll go over to Josh first. So let's kick it off, Josh.
Thank you, Ann. Absolutely. We'll get started here and cover some of the foundational materials, and then Karen can provide some of the expert insights on this topic and some case study examples. First and foremost, I think, when you're thinking of coalitions, it really is building an army of supporters. And that is also applies to overarching grassroots. So you already have an army of supporters, whether you're an association, nonprofit, or corporate entity. It could be employees, it could be your members, and that is your main army. But I also like to think of it as getting allies and getting other folks involved in your cause and your issue to broaden that army. And I like to go back to the Frederick the Great quote, "Diplomacy without an army is like music without instruments." And that's very true in the battles that we face in the advocacy arena. Think of going back, and I know I'm using a lot of historical references, but the Revolutionary War with the United States getting the French to assist in defeating the British. That is the type of analogy that I think is applicable in the sense of grassroots to coalitions. It's better to negotiate from a position of strength with the physical resources necessary to affect the policy-making process, and grassroots is largely about amassing this army of advocates that harmoniously echo the sentiment of your organization. And their strength in numbers. If you agree with a position, getting other groups together makes sense. In 2016, Ann and I actually worked on a project for CQ Connectivity on 9 questions to ask before forming a coalition. And I went back to the archives, again, history today, and pulled that list of questions. And the questions that you really need to ask before forming a coalition come down to this. What is a coalition exactly as you define it yourself? Isn't my own army big enough? How do I know when I need a coalition? Who should I pick for my coalition? Why do I need to approach coalition members from different organizations? How do you avoid differences? That's a key one right there. How do I deal with multiple different agendas? How do I figure out who does what? And then, of course, the metrics. How do I measure success? And that's another key question there, too. Loosely defined, a coalition is an alliance formed for a combined action. That's the most simple, basic definition of a coalition. Here are a few examples of coalitions, the Data Coalition, the Coalition for Public Safety, and I think that one is interesting in particular because you have groups like the ACLU on one side, and then you have, and Center for American Progress, and then also Freedom Works and Americans for Tax Reform. So you see groups coming together on very specific issues, very specific coalitions that would be considered unaligned in other areas or as a whole. And, you know, here's, to address one of the questions further, isn't my own army big enough? Do we lack the grassroots manpower to defeat opposing forces from competing associations and corporations? And I think that that's a big question that you have to answer. Can you do this on your own, or does it make sense to get others involved? That will take time and resources away from your organization, but that investment might be better in the long run. Are our advocates' voices currently being heard? If there isn't a problem and you are getting traction, maybe starting a coalition is not necessary on that issue in particular. Are advocates even willing to take action? That's something, you know, if you have a number of people that are present, that's great, but if they're not going out and actually taking some type of action, whether it's petitioning or writing to Congress or a regulator, then those numbers are moot, and that's just something that you report. Is our message getting out to people who need to hear it? Is your audience policymakers? Is it the general public? Are they hearing about your issue, or would it make sense to loop another group in to target an area that you haven't? If you're thinking of forming a coalition and you're aligned on a certain issue area, you might fare better well with public outreach, and your coalition member might fare better with Hill outreach. They might have better relationships there. Are we trying to unsuccessfully reach people beyond your membership? And that sometimes is a great advantage of a coalition, is bringing unlikely people to the table on an issue from outside. How do I know when I need a coalition? If you could achieve more success with assistance of like-minded people through a shared or similar goal, you're a prime candidate for a coalition. Again, shared goal, combining successes and needing assistance. You want to prevent duplicative action by similar groups and to create an atmosphere that provides peer support and facilitates the exchange of information, skills, and resources. If there are 20 associations that agree that this policy change needs to happen, it doesn't make sense to have them all disconnected and not communicating with another, because those resources might be better to be collectivized and then to work in unison, in concert. You've reached an advocacy roadblock with a specific policy. That, I think, is critical. If you are not getting any traction on the Hill, or the regulators are ignoring you, you have to think outside of the box, and one of the ways to think outside of the box is forming a coalition. One of the case study examples that I will give, when I was running grassroots for the American Motorcyclists Association, we were fighting the New Jersey Department of Environment on land access issues for motorcycle races. And those races, we were getting nowhere. The DEP was not taking meetings with us, but we figured out, you know, through those races, a lot of money was raised for local fire departments. So we reached out to the National Volunteer Fire Council and got them on board to sign a letter. Again, this is more of a partnership. We didn't go beyond that. And I had transitioned to another organization after that period of time, but we were looking to get EMS, other entities that benefited from those races themselves. So going into a congressional office, or in this case, going into the state DEP with a motorcyclist and a volunteer fireman was much better than going with a motorcyclist alone. You want to research groups that might be affected by a specific policy, motivate them to take action along your organization. You hold a specific policy position. It might be vastly different, but you have the same mission at hand, and the coalition may be a possible solution to bring that policy impasse together. This is another example of two coalitions, the Smarter Fuel Future and Fuels America. They're two coalitions that are opposed to one another. They're working against one another. Again, when I was at the American Motorcyclists Association, we were on the Smarter Fuel Future Coalition opposing E15 ethanol mandates. And there were a lot of unlikely groups together. You had, corporate entities like Wendy's, you had the Boaters Association, Boat USA, and different groups like that coming together. Some of them had grassroots power, some of them had financial resources, some of them had polling, some of them had, I like to think of this analogy as coming to the lunch table as a kid, where everyone would trade different things and bring, I have a peanut butter sandwich, you have carrots. What can we exchange and share and have a better lunch? Consider coalition members. Are they complementary to your organization? Do they possess a track record of coalition work? Have they the ability to recruit new members? Will they bring specific skills or resources to the coalition, and are they going to actively participate? And I think that last point is critical. Are they going to actively participate? Make no mistake, I've given advice to a lot of nonprofit organizations on how to maximize their coalition involvement and maximize the resources of other coalition members. But as that small nonprofit, you still have a role to play in the coalition, and it's not a freeloading exercise there. How do I deal with multiple different agendas? Again, a key thing that will come up probably in the infancy or the formation of the coalition is the idea of itself. Designate a rep from each organization to routinely attend meetings, briefings, and other events to report back. Hold in-person meetings to network and connect on a personal level. It's harder to dig your heels completely with people you like than you would if you know them personally. And I think that is important to connect with people on a personal level, because coalitions can be around the country, can be international, but at some point, that in-person, face-to-face, we always emphasize that when meeting with Hill office and regulators on the grassroots level, it's as important with coalition building as well, to get to know folks. Host a kickoff, happy hour, or social event to garner enthusiasm. I think that's something that is neglected with some coalitions, and some obviously don't have the budget capacity to have a large event or kickoff rally, but just getting some people together for kind of a brown bag lunch might be something that will have returns in the future of getting the personal relationships solidified. Consider hiring an outside facilitator to run meetings and coordinate schedules and coalition activities such as a public affairs firm. That's important because you might not agree and you might be fighting organizations within your coalition on other issues, so you need a mediator or arbiter in case those issues bleed over into the actual coalition work. Develop a content calendar. I think that's important to know key deliverables, provide channels for routine and open communication, formalize documents that outline policies, priorities, and procedures for handling grievances. Grievances are going to come up. It's the name of the game. Be open and willing to compromise. And I'll kick it over to Karen to provide some case studies and some more information on coalition building.
Okay, great. Thank you, Josh. And I guess we'll just go straight over to Karen.
Thank you so much. Great job, Josh. It's important for people to know that there is such a powerful resource for you in having a coalition. What I find is that what you have to do to harness that power is you've got to be able to educate and amplify the message in order to drive that action. So I've been developing, managing, leveraging, activating coalitions for more than 20 years. And what I really find is the greatest strength are those coalitions that are diverse enough that they can last over many issues over many years. And in fact, we run one coalition that has 130 organizations in it, and it's been active for more than 25 years now. So what I think has changed in the coalition world is technology. what is the new opportunities and the challenges in coalition building, leveraging, and activating and sustaining? The opportunity is social media. I believe that coalition building and activation in the 21st century has to continue to leverage all the normal tools that we are all very used to using, the media relations, the public relations, the grassroots, grass tops activities, but we layer on social and digital. So before I launch into it, I want you to know about a year ago, our firm did a research project. We sent out a survey to the Capital Press Corps of the 10 largest states in the nation. So the Florida, Texas, California, New York, etc. The 10 largest states in the nation, their Capital Press Corps, and we talked to them about social and digital platforms. Interesting, Capital Press Corps said 81% of the time they decided what story or enhanced the story they were writing based on what they read on Twitter. Now, what I find is that furthermore, for this conversation, 74% said the brand of the coalition, 70+% of the time, determined whether they were going to leverage them as a credible resource to use and utilize in the stories that they create. So building a coalition that brings credible partners to the table, has a clear agenda, and engages not only the elected officials, but also the media on social media, I think is the way you deal with coalitions in the 21st century. So we all know that if you want to pass a bill or kill a bill or have your issue acknowledged, you really have to have a story. So what I'd like to do is share with you a quick story. Now, according to the AP, Florida has the most digitally connected and engaged set of elected officials of any state. Well, the story I want to share with you is about Louisiana, because I'm quite sure it is at the other end of the scale from Florida on digitally connected elected officials. So the patient access for Louisiana was created several years ago to address what I would call patient access issues dealing with treatments or medications. It was third-party groups of patients, physicians, business organizations. But this coalition in 2018 decided what they wanted to do was create landmark legislation that dealt with prescription drug transparency and savings to consumers on their medications. Now, this takes a lot of education. It's a complicated issue, especially for elected officials, but it also is one that's traditionally not favored by elected officials because it all has to do with the cost of medications. That landscape and that environment is not traditionally friendly to conversations about drug pricing issues. So what we had to do was create platforms where a coalition that existed could then bring in more diverse groups of organizations. So here's my first tip with you. Any coalition should be actively engaged on a minimum of 3 platforms. I recommend Facebook, Twitter as your 2 primary, and then depending on who your stakeholders are and your target audiences are, whether the additional platform might be Instagram or Pinterest or Snapchat. But I have to tell you, YouTube is the fastest growing platform within the millennial population. And so if you're trying to engage that next generation of grassroots participants, I would consider that for your 3rd platform. So what we wanted to do was educate elected officials on why this issue was important. We also very clearly wanted to geo-target the key voters, key leadership within the House and Senate. You will see here that what we did was we wanted to create a venue for them. We had the traditional website for the coalition. It had been active for many years, but we created a separate landing page where we could target everyone as a one-stop shop for the issue of the coalition, activation of the coalition, and expansion of the coalition. We then connected all coalition members via social digital platforms to all the House and Senate members and the members of the people in the Louisiana legislature. We wanted to geo-target them with direct messages, which we did with hashtags, but more importantly, what we shared with each coalition member received social media cheat sheets. What I find in coalitions, just as Josh was saying, you really have to have somebody acting as the leader, otherwise chaos ensues. And so these cheat sheets were to see to it that there was consistency of the message. But we did social around bill filing or pre and post committee meetings or when the bill passed, whatever milestone is there. It's that constant drumbeat. Now, why am I using this as an example? Well, I can tell you we had exactly 3 weeks to get this bill passed. The coalition finally decided to do it. We had 3 weeks till session ended. We didn't have time to do the traditional coalition recruitment. We didn't have time for the traditional, let's get an op-ed placed, let's set up television interviews, etc. We did this entire campaign using the coalition, which were like-minded individuals, to do social media engagement. Now, what I also like about this, by the way, the bill passed into the law in its very first year. It's the first in the nation, but because we use social media to engage our coalition, what we found was non-traditional coalition members wanted to join. If this was a small issue of coalition activity in just the state of Louisiana, that would be great, and of course, it would effectively engage them to deal with the public policy issue. But because we were using social digital platforms, all of a sudden people outside of the state were very much wanting to engage. And so instead of having 5 or 6 members of a coalition targeting members on education and how to vote, we now had 300. We now had 600 organizations that wanted, or individuals that wanted to get in and have their voice heard. The other thing I want you to think about for the coalition is not just, you need to do the traditional building of the coalition, just as Josh said, but afterwards, you need to see to it that if you've done a substantial job of effectively leveraging social media, then you need to, when you've had success, use those same platforms to say thank you. And you see here an example of organizations that came on board and directly targeted members to say thank you to them. We actually created a landing page where people could go and type their thank you in, and it would be direct sent to the member off of that landing page. And in fact, the bill sponsor in Louisiana said it was the most thank yous he had received on any one issue, and in fact, more thank yous than all other issues put together during that legislative session. So let's go back to why do we want to build, grow, and sustain a coalition. Let me tell you the advantages of utilizing digital to help grow your coalition is that you want to make sure that you're doing it in the most strategic and cost-effective way. I work with many clients who say, we don't have the dollars to place ads, we can't have all these fly-in costs that go with it, and frankly, we don't have the resources in order to hire lots of either governmental affairs professionals or lobbyists. But the coalition, if effectively utilized, can spend their resources in social digital media and what dollars they have supplement the activities for it. So what you want to do is build, grow, and then keep the conversation moving. So let's talk a little more about the build. What I want you to know is that you need to figure out who is best and appropriate to be in your coalition. And then you reach out to them using social digital media. So Kantar or eMarketer are two great third-party tools that you could go out there and help find additional traditional and non-traditional folks to bring them into your coalition. You want audiences that are not only members of large organizations to join your coalition, but you really do need the individuals to help be the additional boots on the ground for you. And are they able to and sophisticated enough to utilize social media to help boost the coalition's activity? And if not, you probably need to be teaching them. I'm asked on a regular basis to come in and, will you teach and educate our board of directors on the value of social digital to help spread our message? I think that if you do that, then you'll be able to expand it quite clearly. But I do want to say to you, it's important that your coalition know that with social, you're going to help them understand the issue, then amplify the issue and have them take action on the issue. But unless you've got the fundamental, which is a really good website, all this other coalition activities is driving them to something, and you need an effective something to drive them to. So the number one marketing tool is a website that is user-friendly and is mobile-friendly. We know that now 92% of people look up information, want to get engaged, and want to discuss issues on their mobile device. And if your website is not mobile friendly, it's better, frankly, just to take it down. You want to create really good content too. What you find is that if people aren't interested in reading what you have or commenting on or retweeting or engaging in it, then you are not going to become a thought leader. And that's what coalitions do best. Coalitions can create that grassroots activity, but they also can be seen as thought leaders on specific issues. And that's where social is really good, when you effectively use one of those platforms. So if, for example, you are using Twitter as one of your main platforms, I'm going to give you some guardrails. Don't take this, because 2 weeks from now, it'll probably change because the technology changes so fast. But Twitter has right now a lifespan of about 7.5 minutes. Because so many people are tweeting, the feed just continues to grow. So you need to tweet out from your coalition on your issue, recommend at least 5 times a week and at least 7 times a day, if possible, when you're activating your coalition. If you're thinking of another platform such as Instagram is really good for those issues that have wonderful photos to go with it. Your coalition needs a story and a face, and your face is who the end user is going to be impacted by. So think about that. Instagram, you should think about at least 3 to 4 times a week with a really engaging photo that goes along with it. And remember, the content, we live in a society that doesn't want to read a lot. In fact, now they don't even want to watch a lot. They want it given to them very quickly. So make sure the content you read is digestible in very short ways. But let me talk to you a moment about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is another one that I would highly recommend your coalitions utilizing. And in fact, it was just this week that I was speaking with one of our Florida congressmen who told me that when he was a former Speaker of the House, what he said was when he decided which way he was going to be looking at to decide on how to vote on a bill, he looked at polls, he looked at the white papers created by his staff, and he read the LinkedIn activities around it. So I think that's a platform that's very important for you all, and it also, in coalitions, the LinkedIn helps you identify like-minded organizations where you can have chats with groups to build partnerships of coalitions, so your ability to have strength gets even further out there. What you know is on LinkedIn, there's more than 200 conversations happening every single minute on that platform. You need to get in the game and participate from your coalition in a LinkedIn group. So I wanted to show you a quick graph of how audiences right now, this snapshot's less than a week old, but you can see Facebook is number one when it talks about issues that coalitions tend to address, Snapchat 2, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Now, I believe YouTube is going to be the fastest growing platform for coalitions access in the future, because people are going to want to see 30 and 45-second vignettes of you talking directly about the story and then geo-targeting it directly to the elected officials that you are going to be going after. Now, Facebook has had some unfavorable press lately, we all agree, but more than 3/4 of the adults use Facebook, and what I find is that for coalitions, Facebook is the easiest platform for them to get on and leverage telling about what their issue is and why it's an important thing for their coalition. It also is very good for branding of the issue and for branding what the coalition sees as its vision of what is positive and negative surrounding a specific bill. You also want to think about, Facebook is very sophisticated in the types of activities that it can do. You can geo-target specific interest or life events or capabilities. We are seeing that this is the end of the golden age of not having to place ads, because ads will be the future on Facebook and every other platform. But right now, for coalitions with zero money, this is probably a good investment to make, so that you post the right number of posts and make sure that they go to the audience at the right time and the right place. Speaking of right time and right place, please note that there are time frames that you might want to think about for your coalition. You might be having coalition meetings in the evening, but that's not the best time for your coalition to be engaging in the conversations with your elected officials. First thing in the morning, late afternoon, I tend to tell clients it's kind of like radio drive time. People are looking at their cell phones as they're going to and from work. Good time to have those kinds of conversations. But don't rely just on the traditional Facebook tool. I'd like to share with you one other recommendation on Facebook. If those of you are not using what's called Town Hall, this is a product offered by Facebook, and it makes it easier for individuals to directly influence their elected officials as a one-on-one. Now, I know there are many paid software programs that you say, yes, we can legislate and engage people. But this is for those coalitions, these not-for-profits that don't have those kinds of budgets or that kind of sophistication. What you do is you go on Facebook, put in the search bar, Town Hall. It brings up, based on your address, all of your local elected officials, your state in that district, and U.S. House and Senate. They're all right there. You can direct connect to them. You can follow with them. You can engage in conversations with them. But here's the really cool thing. You push on the button and it brings up a constituent badge. So when the member sees you sending a message, they automatically know you're from their district. And so I think that's more powerful than traditional coalition activities of let's do an email blast, and they get hundreds of email messages, but they really don't know if they're coming from their district or not. This is a guarantee that this is a person who could or has been a voter of theirs. So I think make sure and leverage the constituent badge that you have as you're directing the town hall meeting. This is the way that coalition members can have each of their individual members leveraging their grassroots activity. The other thing with this town hall meeting is that if you go to the community section of it, of the Facebook page, based on the number of people that are in there connecting, it'll tell the member what is the trending issue or trending topic from his or her specific district. So I think that's a great new tool, and again, that's no cost. Let me wrap up by talking about we need to make sure you continue the dialogue. Josh knows that many coalitions get built, they get activated, and then 6 months after the issue's gone, the coalition goes away. And then surprisingly, 3 years later, the same issue comes back up and you've got to restart up that coalition. I think that is not good time on task. I think what you want is coalitions that can have a long shelf life. So you want to continue the dialogue with them. I find the way to continue the dialogue is not only routine email updates, perhaps it's newsletters, but again, using digital media. As you see here, Twitter's the #1, but I do want to talk about forums, and forums can either be through chat activities, it could be through a LinkedIn. What we know is that Snapchat is becoming less used by coalitions, but I fully expect those folks are going to be figuring out how they can reverse that trend and are going to turn around and go back after the Twitter and the Instagram followers also. What you want to do is to sustain the coalition. I recommend that you look at a content calendar, divide the year into quarters, that you have a minimum of 1 activity per month in each quarter. So 12 times a year, you have some sort of engagement with your coalition members moving forward, even if it's just to say, here's the status of what's happened with the activities, or here's something that may be coming down the pike. Or I also like having individual members of the coalition step up to the plate and provide additional clarity around why they are participating in that coalition. You also want to join in on other conversations. You see here, this is a graph by Sysmos, which is a sophisticated listening software on what's happening on social digital. And you will find that there are times when not much is being said. You can be the primary conversation initiator at that, or you can join in when you see items are being discussed about your issue. You have the way to go back and forth. Obviously, one of the newest things I'm seeing for coalition is live tweeting during activation times, whether from meetings or from when you're doing Hill visits. I'll share with you, we did a live tweet during Prostate Cancer Month a year ago. USA Today joined in with us, and believe it or not, we had more than 1 million people participating in that live chat. And so you may think that your issue is not that interesting or glamorous or applicable to lots of people, but I can tell you, if you can tie it, your issue and your coalition, to being considered a powerful and influential leader, then you're going to start getting some very big traction, again, making you a thought leader. So what I want to do is maybe wrap up with a couple last thoughts for you. One is that in 2020, the millennial generation will be the majority in the workforce. Millennials are not the let's sit back and think about a coalition, let's do a fly-in, let's write an op-ed. They are willing to participate if someone else organizes it, but they are really fully engaged if you give them platforms where they can sit with their smart devices and fully engage in the topic. The other thing to think about is elected officials now really are looking at coalitions, because we live in such a divisive environment now. If they believe this isn't a one-off, that this is a group of hopefully non-traditional allies coming together to support an issue, then they are more interested in speaking with you and hearing with you. So I'll leave you with one last story. I was meeting with a member of Congress recently, and the member was running late by about 20 minutes, and when he finally came in, he clearly didn't realize that we were there on a topic dealing with intellectual property, but he had just come from a topic of a meeting dealing with fossil fuels. He came in, was so upset, was very irritated, and launched into talking about the fossil fuels issue. At one point, he did take a breath, and I jumped in, and I said, Congressman, I know what your passion is. In fact, I read your tweet on that issue last week. And he sort of paused, and he said, you did? And I said, yes, sir. And in fact, you tweeted it out to your 700 so followers, and I retweeted it out to my 17,000 followers. And you could visibly see the stress come off the gentleman. And he sits back in the chair, and he said, you did that for me? I said, yes, sir, we did. He said, what are we here to talk about today? And what can I do to help you, because you just helped me? So I want to end with the idea of coalitions are extremely important. Utilizing the new technology in Twitter and Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, etc., is a challenge, but also a great asset. And frankly now, Twitter is the new way to make friends and influence people. We open it up to questions.
Absolutely. Terrific. Thank you, Karen. And I was kind of exhausted listening to you saying 5 times a day and 7 times a week. But then when I heard about your 1 million tweets for prostate cancer, I figured that's probably not a bad return on investment there. I did want to go to questions, but before we go to kind of audience questions, I have one for both of you. You kind of touched on it earlier, Josh, and you did too, Karen, but at what point should you go it alone? So, you know, a coalition isn't the answer to everything, obviously. Sometimes you're better off just having your organization as the main kind of carrier of an issue. So kind of when should you go it alone? When should you take on other stakeholders? And kind of when should you hire a company like Karen's, or when should you sort of keep that stuff in-house?
For sure. You know, and Karen and I were talking before the webinar about these sign-on letters, and I think that is a good benchmark where, you know, they might not be effective, but you have a lot of people coming together, they agree on something. I think that if you have 20, 30 people consistently every Congress signing on and supporting something, different resources, that's the appropriate time to say, all right, well, these sign-on letters might not necessarily be working. Can we bring our forces together and get the public affairs, get the public relations, get the grassroots, get the traditional lobbying? Can we put all those pieces together and get financing to come up with a firm to work on a project?
I think a coalition can be a very effective tool, but if not used wisely or coordinated and managed wisely, it can be a very dangerous tool. So what you want is to make sure that you've got that core group of individuals who are willing to address this problem in the long term, not just the short term. And if it really is not got that kind of commitment, sometimes it is better for you to just rally your own troops.
Okay, great. You've both worked on probably both federal and state, different kinds of coalitions. Is the messaging slightly different at both, or is it sort of a one-size-fits-all, or what are the differences?
And just speaking off of personal experience, and I know if you've been on a coalition, it's a case-by-case example, but the federal coalitions, usually it's a larger issue that's very difficult to move, and you're trying to get traction. If you're putting together a state coalition, you're really trying to push something over the goal line, and it's easier to do because if you're amassing 20 groups at the state level, that's going to get traction from any legislature. But at the federal level, there are usually coalitions well-financed on both sides of an issue, you know, lobbing bombs at one another consistently.
Yeah, Josh is right. I think that no matter what, it's how do you message the issue, whether it's at the state or federal, but generally the federal works at glacial speed, and so you need coalitions that are there for the long haul, whereas you might have something happening out in the states like Louisiana, and you have 3 weeks to do it. So those coalitions come together quickly and have to move quickly, whereas the big federal ones, frankly, they need to be managed and financed well.
Is there kind of a magic number in terms of how many folks or organizations you should have on a coalition? Is too many ever too many, or too few?
Again, I mean, issue to issue, I've been on coalitions that have had over 120 folks, 20 different organizations, but as little as 3. So it is one of those things where there's a very wide spectrum. The debate in that context, in that question is, should we be a formal trade association or, you know, non-membership association instead of just being a coalition? Is it going to be something that's going to last 150 years and always be necessary to be around? I mean, there's trade-offs between the different tax statuses, and there's a lot of different layers to that question to go into.
You know, I find many times people will ask me, well, what's the difference between a coalition and a network and a partnership? And, you know, these are all words that could technically be the same thing. I think what Josh was saying about you need to think about your tax status. If it is truly like-minded individuals coming together, the new word that's the shiny penny these days is network versus coalition, but that doesn't mean that the word coalition isn't just as good. Now, partnership, I believe, does have a perception of being something different, something that is much more legal with bylaws and things like that. So I think you have to look at what you want to build and how you're going to use it.
Okay, makes sense. Well, that's about all we have time for today, folks. Thank you again to Karen Moore and to Joshua Habursky. So have a great day, everyone.